What if I told you that the Bible hid the names and secret powers of African gods who shaped entire civilizations, powerful spiritual realms, and even influenced biblical characters, without you ever realizing it? Yes. What you know today as the Christian faith, as the Holy Bible, may be carrying hidden traces of ancestral African deities, gods with supernatural powers, with dominion over nature, over the human spirit, and even over the destiny of humanity. Why did these names disappear? Who erased their stories? And why are there so many similarities between African gods and sacred figures from the scriptures? Coincidence or intentional concealment? Get ready. Because what we're about to reveal today isn't just a history lesson. It's a dive into an ocean of forbidden secrets, of truths hidden by religion, colonization, and spiritual manipulation that lasted for centuries. For a long time, African gods were demonized, silenced, or simply ignored by major religious institutions. Their rituals were labeled pagan, their offerings seen as witchcraft, and their spiritual manifestations condemned as sin. But what would happen if we discovered that many of the powers attributed to the prophets, kings, and apostles of the Bible are, in fact, echoes of the same spiritual gifts revealed by gods such as Obatala, Shango, Yemanja, Ogun, Obatala, and so many others? Does the Bible really tell the whole story, or are there hidden chapters suppressed, perhaps deliberately, to erase the spiritual memory of Africa? When we look at the scriptures with decolonized eyes, free from European filters, we find clues, enigmatic traces of a spiritual connection to the African continent that can no longer be ignored. From ancient Egypt to biblical Ethiopia, passing through Kush, Canaan, and other black lands mentioned in the scriptures, there is a strong, ancestral, powerful presence. A presence that has been edited, translated, distorted, and finally erased. But today, that veil is about to fall. What you believe about God, about good and evil, about angels and demons, may need to be re-evaluated in light of the hidden mysteries of African ancestry. The truth is that African gods have not disappeared. They remain alive in the memories of the people, in the sacred rituals of the Yoruba, Bantu, Akan nations, and surprisingly, perhaps even in certain symbols, practices, and expressions that we see in the modern Christian faith. Have you ever wondered why some biblical passages seem incomplete, why certain books were excluded, or why biblical figures like Moses, Solomon, and Elijah manifested powers so similar to those of African deities? Today, we will explore the secret powers of African gods that the Bible didn't want you to know about. We will analyze, with courage and without fear of the truth, how this spiritual force was removed from the sacred pages and why. This is no ordinary video. This is an invitation to open your spiritual eyes. It's about reconnecting with the essence that has been severed. It's about remembering the wisdom that runs in your blood, even if you've never heard of these names before. Now the question is, are you ready to confront everything you've been taught? Are you ready to see with your own eyes what has been hidden for generations? Because the truth is right before you, and what we're going to reveal next, it will change the way you read the Bible forever. So before we continue with the deeper revelations, I want to know your opinion. Did you already suspect that there were connections between African gods and biblical accounts? Do you believe that African spirituality has been silenced for centuries, even though it is a living part of the history of faith? Write in the comments. What part has impacted you the most so far? I read everything, and your opinion can help shed more light on this very hidden topic. And look, if this content is opening your mind and making you see the Bible and spirituality in a new light, leave a like right now. This helps YouTube understand that this topic is important and shows that you want to see more videos like this. Comment, like, and share. Because the more people who have access to this truth, the more we will break the chains of spiritual ignorance that have been imposed upon us. And if you're not yet subscribed to this channel, subscribe now. This is just the beginning. What comes next will further shake everything you believed about faith, the Bible, ancestry, and spiritual power. Let's go through this revelation together until the end. You won't want to miss what's coming. From the earliest times, long before European empires imposed their theologies and interpretations of sacred scriptures, African peoples already maintained a deep connection with the spiritual world. This spirituality was not something external, cold, or institutionalized. It was lived, felt, and practiced every day, in villages, in rituals, in songs, in the elements of nature. African gods were not merely untouchable divine figures in ancient books. They were present in the rain, in the thunder, in the harvests, in the birth of children, in the dreams of the elders, in the winds that heralded change. For the peoples of Egypt, Kush, Ethiopia, and later the Yoruba traditions, the gods were part of life and of identity. In ancient Egypt, long before Hebrew writing consolidated the biblical texts as we know them today, the people already worshipped deities such as Osiris, Isis, Ra, and Thoth. These figures not only represented aspects of nature or human personality, but also governed the destinies of souls, the cycles of life and death, judgments after death, and cosmic balance. The Egyptian Book of the Dead, for example, speaks of a spiritual judgment involving the heart being weighed on a scale before Maat, the goddess of justice. The similarity to the biblical final judgment is simply impossible to ignore. Is it a coincidence? Or were elements of these African beliefs adapted, reinterpreted, or even erased in the process of forming the Judeo-Christian sacred writings? When we look at the Kush region, a powerful empire south of Egypt, located in what is now Sudan, we see a strong, spiritual black civilization with historical records of direct influence on the kingdoms of Israel and Judah. It is no coincidence that Moses married a Kushite woman, as recounted in the Book of Numbers. Nor is it a coincidence that the Queen of Sheba, a monarch from the Ethiopian region, appeared before King Solomon with wisdom, riches, and mysteries. The Bible mentions these encounters, but rarely explores the spiritual depth of these peoples. It mentions them as footnotes, when in fact many scholars already acknowledge that African influences on the Hebrew people were significant, perhaps more so than has been recorded. We live in extremely difficult times, in which prophecies are marked, but many still do not realize what is happening in the world. For this, I have made my ebook available, To Reveal the Apocalypse, which you can download immediately through the first set of comments. This book will help you uncover all the mysteries of the apocalypse and transform your life. Go to the first set of comments to get your copy, as very little remains and will be removed soon. Don't waste time. Click now and secure your digital copy. Moving forward in time, with the formation of Yoruba traditions, especially in West Africa, present-day Nigeria, Benin, and Togo, the spiritual worldview becomes even more refined. The concept of orishas emerges, divine entities with specific functions linked to nature, the elements, and human conduct. Obatala, the creator; Shango, the orisha of justice and thunder; Ogun, the warrior and patron of technologies; Yemanja, the mother of the waters. These deities communicate with humans through initiations, dances, chants, divination with cowrie shells, and trance states. They are living spiritual forces. Now stop and think, how many times have you read in the Bible about characters who entered into spiritual ecstasy, who received revelations through dreams, who fought sacred wars, who parted the sea, who called down fire from the heavens? Were the cultures really so distant, or is there something deeper there, something that has been carefully concealed? With the arrival of European colonization in Africa, and subsequently with the enslavement of African peoples and the forced diaspora to the Americas, this spirituality was brutally attacked. The colonizers not only removed Africans from their lands, but also tried to erase their faith, their rituals, their beliefs. They considered the orishas as demons, the chants as witchcraft, the tereros, religious centers, as heresy. They imposed European Christianity as the only truth and presented the Bible as the ultimate tool for salvation. But even so, the ancestral force resisted. African spirituality did not die. It hid itself. It adapted. And here enters a question that needs to be discussed seriously. What happened there was a spontaneous syncretism, or an intentional concealment. And don't forget to get your Reveal the Apocalypse ebook. It is very important that you buy it quickly before the copies run out. Syncretism is when cultures mix, creating something new from distinct elements. But what happened with African religiosity was different. It was silenced, censored, forced to hide within Catholic images, names of saints, disguised symbols. The orishas were dressed in Christian cloaks to survive persecution. Ogun became St. George. Yemanja was associated with the Virgin Mary. Shango was confused with St. Jerome or St. John, and while this was happening, the profound content of ancestral faith was kept alive by the initiates. And within the Bible, didn't the same process occur? Weren't elements of African traditions absorbed, modified, or hidden within parables, Hebrew names and mysterious passages that seem out of place? The curious thing is that many African peoples who converted to Christianity during the 18th and 19th centuries reported feeling a strange familiarity with certain biblical stories. It was as if something in those texts resonated with ancient memories, untold but spiritually lived through generations. After all, how to explain that the Hebrew God manifests himself so often through fire, storms, turbulent waters and trembling earth, exactly as the orishas manifest themselves in African rituals? How to explain that biblical characters possessed gifts of healing, prophecy, spiritual warfare, and dominion over nature, gifts identical to those attributed to the priests and priestesses of African peoples? The Bible was written in real historical contexts, and the African continent was part of those contexts. This is not about denying the Bible. On the contrary, it is about opening it with different eyes, about looking at the sacred texts through the lens of ancestry, of the original spirituality of the peoples who were silenced, and perhaps, just perhaps, rediscovering what was lost or hidden. Faith doesn't have to be blind, it has to be conscious. When we understand where we come from, we begin to see more clearly where we are going. African narratives are neither pagan nor inferior. They are deep spiritual roots that have been in dialogue with the divine since long before the emergence of the religious institutions that now dominate the interpretation of Scripture. If this dialogue still exists, why has it been silenced? Why has the history of black faith been removed from pulpits, seminaries, and theological textbooks? Why do so many pastors, priests, and scholars avoid addressing these issues? Comment below. This truth needs to be revealed. If you believe this information can no longer be hidden, also write which country or city you are watching from. We want to show that the spiritual awakening of ancestry is happening in every corner of the world. And if you already knew about any of these connections between the orishas and biblical characters, share the one that caught your attention the most. Your participation here is very important. Every comment strengthens this message and helps more people be reached by this truth that is being restored. By now, perhaps your mind is already restless, beginning to connect dots that previously seemed loose. But now I want to take you even deeper. I want you to follow me with complete attention, because what we are going to explore may change the way you read the Old Testament forever. Among the many mysterious figures present in the scriptures, there are some that defy simple explanations. Men and women who appear as if from another spiritual dimension. Characters with unusual authority, wisdom beyond the natural, and who seem to appear only for a brief moment, leaving behind more questions than answers. And when we look with awakened eyes, with a decolonized gaze, we realize that perhaps, just perhaps, they are not just historical figures. Perhaps they are there as coded representations of ancestral deities, perhaps even African gods who have been hidden under layers of translation, doctrine, and fear. Consider Melchizedek, a name that appears out of nowhere in Genesis 14. A king, a priest, from a city called Salem. No genealogy, no father, no mother. No beginning of days, nor end of life, as the text itself says in Hebrews. He appears before Abraham, the patriarch of the Hebrew faith, bringing bread and wine, symbols that are later used by Jesus at the Last Supper. And Abraham, the great Abraham, recognizes this being and gives him a tithe of everything. What kind of priest was this? Why does the Bible insist on saying that he was not of the Levitical priesthood, but of a superior and eternal order? Now imagine this. What if Melchizedek wasn't just a man? What if he represented a spiritual deity revered by ancient African peoples, whose records were later erased or converted into language more acceptable to the biblical authors? Salem, his city, predates Jerusalem. His actions have profound spiritual symbolism. And his lack of genealogy breaks with the entire Hebrew tradition of sacred lineages. He is a mystery, a portal, an echo of something greater. And Melchizedek is not the only one. In the Book of Kings, we find another figure shrouded in mystery, the woman named Hamutal, mother of King Zedekiah. Her name has linguistic roots that refer to peace and gentleness, but there are older interpretations, not accepted by traditional theological circles, that associate this name with Kushite royalty, female lineages of spiritual authority from the Kush region. Her role in the biblical narrative is discreet but strategic. She is positioned as the mother of a king, connecting the lineage of Judah with a possibly African heritage. Isn't it curious how the text only mentions her, without explaining where she comes from, what her exact origin is? Silence. A pattern. We can observe the same thing in the famous Queen of Sheba, a powerful woman who travels from distant lands, according to tradition from Ethiopia, to meet Solomon. And she doesn't go empty-handed. She brings gold, spices, riddles, spiritual questions. The biblical narrative seems to rush through her life, but behind the scenes of African traditions, the Queen of Sheba is more than a visitor. She is a symbol of divine wisdom, an entity, a representation of the ancestral sacred feminine. And her visit to King Solomon in Ethiopian tradition doesn't end there. Legend says that a son was born to her, Menelik, who would carry the blood of David to Africa and found a spiritual dynasty that would last for centuries. Now stop and think, why doesn't the Bible narrate this ending? Why does it end the story of the Queen of Sheba so abruptly, as if her role there was only that of an admirer of a man's wisdom? Questions begin to multiply when we read the scriptures attentively. For example, in Genesis, where did the peoples who inhabited Canaan before the arrival of the Hebrews come from? The texts speak of giant nations, sons of Anak, men of renown, fearsome peoples. There are descriptions of kings who lived for hundreds of years. Are these merely hyperboles, or are they remnants of a profound spirituality that the Hebrews encountered, confronted, and in certain cases absorbed? African peoples, primarily from the Kush, Ethiopia, and Egyptian regions, had commercial, cultural, and spiritual relations with Semitic peoples since antiquity. What is not said in sermons is that the Hebrews did not live in isolation. They were immersed in a spiritual melting pot, amidst cults, rituals, and deities, with histories far older than Abraham himself. And when Moses was raised in the Egyptian court, he not only learned to read and write, he absorbed the culture, the mystical thought, and the religious symbolism of the Egyptian gods. Many scholars acknowledge that the construction of the tabernacle has Egyptian features, that Aaron's priesthood reflects practices from African temples, and that the Ark of the Covenant bears resemblance to sacred relics from Nubian and Ethiopian cultures. So was Hebrew spirituality really created from scratch? Or was it built upon older spiritual layers, like a tapestry woven from threads of different colors, cultures, and creeds? This is not about replacing biblical faith with ancestral African faith. It's about understanding that perhaps both are deeply connected, that the God of Israel was not revealed in a vacuum, that he manifested himself amidst rich, wise cultures deeply connected to the divine, including African cultures. That is why so many biblical names, gestures, and rituals carry traces of a spirituality that Western theology has preferred to erase. That is why characters like Melchizedek, Hamutal, and the Queen of Sheba continue to provoke us, even after thousands of years. Because perhaps they are not just historical figures. Perhaps they are portals, spiritual representations, signs that the Bible did not only hide stories, but presences. African spiritual presences that still live among us, waiting to be recognized. If this content made you think, comment below. I want to know the whole truth. If any of these biblical figures I mentioned today caught your attention, write their name in the comments. Let's build this journey of spiritual rescue together. If you feel this video is opening something up inside you, write, "This message awakened something in me." Your participation is what makes this content reach further. The algorithm reads every comment, every like. So if you believe this truth needs to be spread, comment, like, and send this video to someone who also needs to open their eyes. And when we begin to investigate more deeply the origin of the images and attributes of the Creator God described in the book of Genesis, the inevitable question arises: is this figure that appears in the first verses of the Bible really as unique as we have been taught? Or is the formless, invisible God who creates the world from chaos, who breathes life into human beings and orders existence with the power of the Word, a universal archetype, described in different ways in different cultures, and who is also deeply present in African spirituality through the figure of Obatala? Obatala in Yoruba traditions is the great orisha of creation. He is the one who molds humankind from clay and breathes life into it, given by the supreme divine power Olorum. He represents purity, light, peace, and patience. He is described as a serene spirit, clothed in white, associated with balance and the origin of all things. His mission was to give form to creation, to organize matter, to give body to what was still formless. Now, see how this aligns with the narrative of the first chapter of Genesis. There we read that the earth was formless and empty, and that the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. God then said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Then he separated, organized, and created. From nothing he made everything. He gave form to what was chaos. The similarity between these descriptions is not merely curious, it is revealing. Because if God, in the biblical account, is the one who creates from clay and breathes the breath of life into man, as we read in Genesis 2:7, and Obatala in African traditions also molds the human body from clay and animates it with the breath of vital energy, Akse, are we really talking about different entities? Or are we facing two distinct cultures trying to explain the same spiritual truth with their own languages, symbols, different names, but a similar essence? It is important to remember that African traditions were not formed in opposition to the Judeo-Christian faith. They already existed before the arrival of missionaries, colonization, and the imposition of foreign religious systems. When Europeans arrived in Africa, they found a people deeply connected to the divine, with complex sacred rituals, oral theologies, moral codes, and a developed spiritual consciousness. They were not a people without faith, but a people with a faith that did not fit into European frameworks. And what is most impressive is that many of the symbols associated with God in the Old Testament also appear linked to Obatala. For example, light. God in Genesis is the first to say, "Let there be light." Light is the first creation, even before the sun. It is spiritual light, light of order, light of clarity. Obatala is also Lord of light, not only of visual clarity but of inner light, of the wisdom that illuminates the path of humankind. Both appear as entities that bring order, that organize the universe, that initiate everything with purpose and intention. Another strong point of connection is the idea of creation through the word or intention. God creates by speaking. His word has creative power. Obatala creates with Akse, the divine energy that emanates from pure intention, from the force that comes from above. In both views, the world is not born by chance, but from a superior consciousness that acts with power and intelligence. This reinforces the idea that we are facing spiritual archetypes, primordial models that transcend cultural boundaries. Now let's look at the image of the Creator as a being without a defined physical form. In the biblical tradition, especially in Exodus and Deuteronomy, we see God warning, "You saw no form of any kind on the day the Lord spoke to you, so that you may not make for yourselves an idol." This has always been used as a basis for saying that God is invisible, without a body, without appearance. Interestingly, Obatala is also not represented literally. He is evoked, felt, celebrated, but is not portrayed with a defined face. When he appears in rituals or symbolic representations, he is always in white, with generic features. The absence of a clear form may not be a coincidence, but rather a common characteristic among cultures that understand that the divine is, above all, mystery. The biblical text also states that man was created in the image and likeness of God. But what does that mean if God has no physical image? Here, once again, the parallel with Obatala is illuminating. The divine likeness, according to the African vision, is not in the form, but in the essence. Man carries Akse, the vital energy that connects him with the Creator. This makes him similar. The image is not the body, but the inner spark. And isn't that exactly what the Holy Spirit represents in the Christian scriptures? What seems to be before us is more than a simple comparison of attributes. It is a call to see with spiritual maturity. Perhaps the God of Genesis and Obatala are not competing names, but different ways of revealing the same divine force that gives rise to life, time, space, and being. And what prevents many people from perceiving this is the prejudice planted by centuries of spiritual colonization, which taught us to reject everything that bears an African name as if it were cursed, while revering the same spiritual principle under Hebrew or Greek names. What if Yoruba traditions had in fact preserved an ancient wisdom that Western theology fragmented? What if Obatala is the spiritual memory of a creator as true as the one written in the Torah, only understood through another language, another rhythm, another music? This reflection does not negate the Bible. On the contrary, it expands upon it. It deepens it. It restores it. Because when we know the God of the Bible only through European translations, we receive only a part of the truth. But when we combine this knowledge with ancestral wisdom, we realize that the divine has always been in dialogue with all peoples, and the African people also heard this voice. So tell me in the comments, had you already noticed this connection between Obatala and the Creator God of the Bible? If so, write, "May God and the God of Genesis be one and the same." And if this impacted you, write, "Now I see things differently." Your reaction can help other people to allow themselves to reflect as well. Don't forget to like the video and leave your honest comment. This strengthens our community and helps YouTube spread this message to more people. If we begin to look more closely at the actions of the prophets in the Old Testament, something very curious begins to reveal itself. It's not just about men chosen by God to transmit messages to the people. There is something deeper. There are symbolic elements, supernatural manifestations, dominion over the elements of nature, powers that go beyond simple preaching or teaching. These are gestures that, when placed side by side with the spiritual entities of the African pantheon, especially the orishas, raise a disturbing question. Could it be that some of the prophets in the Bible not only resemble these African deities, but are versions, resonances, reflections of the same spiritual archetype? Let's start with Elijah, one of the most impactful prophets of the Old Testament. He is remembered for his direct confrontation with the prophets of Baal, for the fire that descended from heaven, for his flight to the desert, and for his ascension to heaven in a whirlwind. Elijah not only prophesied, he mastered fire, invoked storms, and opened and closed the heavens with his word. Now think of Shango, the orishas of justice, of thunder, of lightning, the one considered the supreme judge among the orishas, who manifests with a roar and power when there is imbalance or injustice. He is also associated with the force of fire, the energy that purifies and restores order. Elijah and Shango share not only the symbolism of fire, but also the posture of justice, the courage to confront and divine intervention in moments of spiritual corruption. Both emerge in times of apostasy, confronting false worship and bringing back the covenant with the divine. Now look at Moses, a central figure in the scriptures, known for liberating the Hebrew people from Egypt, leading them through the desert, and parting the Red Sea with his staff. Moses has a profound relationship with water. He is saved from the waters as a baby, grows up in a culture linked to the Nile, transforms water into blood, draws water from the rock, and commands the sea as if he had a spiritual pact with the elements. This immediate connection leads us to think of Yemanja, the great mother of the waters in the Yoruba tradition. Yemanja is a source of protection, fertility, nourishment, and passage. She is associated with the sea, the deep waters, and the sacred feminine. And if Moses represents the masculine figure who acts with the power of the waters, Yemanja embodies that same power in an ancestral expression that transcends gender and assumes the role of ruler over human emotions, transitions, and rebirths. Both represent paths of passage. Moses leads the people through the sea. Yemanja guides the spirits between worlds. Both are intercessors between the visible and the invisible, between chaos and crossing. And then we have Joshua, Moses' successor, the one who leads the people to the promised land, who leads wars, who wins battles with spiritual strategies, who marches around walls until they fall with shouts and trumpets. Joshua is the warrior, but not just any warrior. He is a spiritual strategist, one who fights not only with a sword, but with faith, divine guidance, and obedience to invisible commands. When we place his figure alongside Ogun, the orisha of war, technology, courage, and the opening of paths, the parallel becomes evident. Ogun is not just brute force, he is battle intelligence, advancement, conquest. He opens the forests, the streets, the spiritual path for others to pass. Joshua does exactly that. He opens the path to the promised land, prepares the people, breaks through resistance. Both walk with firmness, carrying spiritual authority to overcome what seems impossible. These parallels are not a simple coincidence. They reveal something deeper. The orishas are not far removed from biblical accounts. They appear in the form of codes, shadows, and inverted images. The symbolic structure surrounding these figures reveals spiritual archetypes present in all cultures, but which were crystallized in the form of prophets among the Hebrews and as deities among the Africans. The most curious thing is that neither the prophets nor the orishas act of their own volition. They obey a higher principle. They are messengers, instruments, channels of a creative energy that is above all, what in Christian language would be God, and in Afro language, Olorum, Olodumare, Zambi. And why is it so important to understand this? Because throughout history, they have tried to convince us that the orishas were demons, that ancestral African faith was inferior, that everything that came from Africa should be purified or eliminated. But when we observe the scriptures with a mind freed from theological colonization, we realize that the same power that acted with Elijah, Moses, and Joshua is the same that dwells in the myths of Shango, Yemanja, and Ogun. What changes is the name, the language, the culture. The source remains the same. Perhaps the key lies precisely in recognizing that God speaks to all peoples, and that his manifestations are multiple, diverse, and adapted to each time and reality. The prophets are not exclusive to one tradition. They are manifestations of the divine to correct the course of humanity. And the orishas, instead of being seen as antagonists of the Bible, can be understood as mirrors, spiritual representations of eternal principles that also operate within the pages of Scripture, albeit under a different name. Now that you understand these connections, tell me, does the Bible really reject everything African, or does it hold, hidden between the lines, much more ancestral knowledge than we have been taught? If you feel this makes sense, comment below, "Ancestry is in the Bible." If any of these parallels resonated with you, write, "Shango is Elijah," or "Yemanja is like Moses," or "Joshua and Ogun are spiritual brothers." Use your intuition. Give voice to what your soul is perceiving right now. And don't forget to like the video and share this revelation with someone who still believes that the orishas and the prophets are on opposite sides. The truth is being revealed, and we still have much to discover together. Now that you're beginning to realize how the orishas and biblical prophets share so many spiritual attributes, perhaps the question echoing in your mind is this: if there are so many similarities, why has no one ever spoken about this openly? Why were we taught to fear everything that comes from Africa while exalting what came from Europe and the Middle East? Why for so long has African spirituality been associated with evil, error, and ignorance, when in fact it carries deep ancestral codes aligned with principles that are also in the Bible? The answer is painful, but it needs to be faced with spiritual maturity and historical awareness. There was an erasure, an intentional erasure, and this erasure began long before you were born, long before your grandparents were born, long before your family even imagined that they would be here, at this moment, hearing this truth being revealed. African spirituality was silenced by force. And what silenced this voice was not only the physical colonization of bodies, but the spiritual colonization of souls. When European empires invaded the African continent, they were not only seeking riches, gold, or labor. They knew that, to dominate definitively, it was necessary to erase the spiritual identity of the people. And for this, they used a powerful tool: institutionalized religion. Faith, which should be liberating, was transformed into an instrument of control. And the Bible, which is a sacred and profound book, was used out of context, molded to the liking of the colonizers, to justify enslavement, the destruction of entire cultures, and the demonization of everything that was not European. The colonial codes created over the centuries were not merely political laws, they also dictated what could and could not be believed. Numerous historical records show that African spiritual practices were criminalized, prohibited, and violently persecuted. Entire peoples were prevented from worshipping their orishas, their ancestors, their gods. The mythologies that narrated the origin of the world from Africa were replaced by European doctrines that portrayed Africans as inferior, as descendants of a curse, as a people who needed to be saved. But saved from what? From their own wisdom. During the most intense periods of colonization and slavery, forced catechism was imposed as the only path to salvation. Priests, missionaries, and soldiers acted as one body, and what happened to those who refused to abandon their rituals? They were punished, killed, exiled. The sacred spaces were burned, the drums silenced, African languages forbidden, and oral knowledge, transmitted from generation to generation, lost ground. And what occupied that space? A sanitized version of Christianity, adapted to serve the powers that be. The Bible, in this context, was edited. Books considered inconvenient were removed, figures linked to Africa were minimized, and above all, a theology was constructed that distanced black people from the divine image. How many of us have heard that the orishas are demons? How many have heard that the faith of our ancestors was idolatry, witchcraft, sorcery? How many were taught to reject their own names, their clothes, their features, their music, because all of that was not of God? This process was not the result of ignorance. It was a strategy, a well-orchestrated strategy to make black people over generations lose their spiritual roots and become totally dependent on the colonizers' religion to feel connected to God. The question that many don't dare ask, but which I bring here with all honesty, is this: did the church hide this truth because it didn't know, or because it was afraid of what it would reveal? What if Christians discovered that the prophets of the Bible are not so different from the orishas? What if pastors realized that many of the spiritual gifts that are celebrated in pulpits today were practiced millennia ago in African villages? What if religious leaders accepted that the Bible is not a European book, but a book of a mixed-race people connected to Africa, to the desert, to the black earth, to the drum that beats like the heart? What we see throughout history is that whenever African truth threatened to emerge, it was stifled by theology, by fear, by excommunication. Many scholars who tried to raise this issue were silenced. Their books did not circulate. Their words were discredited. And meanwhile, an entire generation grew up believing that to be accepted by God, it was necessary to abandon one's roots. But how can one reconnect with the divine if one cuts off the foundation of one's own identity? The truth that is being restored now, and you are a part of it, is that African spirituality was never the problem. The problem was the lie we were told about it. And this lie was reinforced by the institutional church, which chose, at many points in history, to protect its interests instead of protecting the truth. We are not talking here about pure faith, love for one's neighbor, the search for God. We are talking about the structure that formed around it, the machine, ecclesiastical politics, spiritual manipulation. And it is at this point that we need to open our eyes, because many people still believe that questioning these structures is a sin. But in fact, it is precisely this questioning that can lead us back to the center of spiritual purpose, the connection with the divine, without masks, without shackles, without colonization. How many times have you heard that Africans were cursed by Noah? That Ham, the cursed son, is the ancestor of Africa? That dark skin was a symbol of curse. This isn't in the original text. This was constructed. And this construction fueled centuries of theological racism. And this racism infiltrated pulpits, seminaries, annotated Bibles, sermons, and it's still there, even if in a veiled way. But now, something is changing, and you are part of that change. Comment below. This truth needs to be told if this passage resonated with you in any way. If you felt something within you rising up against this spiritual erasure, write, "I am the resistance." Have you ever noticed how the Christian narrative told in churches rarely mentions Africa as an essential part of the history of faith? Whenever they talk about early Christianity, the image presented to us is of white apostles in European cities, gathered in Roman or Greek councils, as if everything had happened there, far from the African continent. But what if I told you that this story is incomplete? What if I showed you that Christianity, in its first centuries, found refuge, strength, and expression precisely on African soil? That the first black Christians were not only converts, but protagonists in the preservation and expansion of this faith that is now worldwide. It is impossible to speak of early Christianity without acknowledging the significant role Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan played in the development of the Christian faith. These territories not only sheltered nascent Christian communities, they became cradles of a profound spirituality marked by resilience, wisdom, and fidelity to the message of Jesus, even in the face of persecution. Ethiopia, for example, was one of the first nations in the world to adopt Christianity as its official religion. And we are not talking about centuries after Christ, we are talking about a few years after the death and resurrection of Jesus. Do you remember the account in Acts of the Apostles, chapter 8, about the Ethiopian eunuch? He was a black man, an official of Queen Candace, responsible for the kingdom's treasures. This man, upon returning to Africa, already carried within him the seed of the gospel. He had the book of the prophet Isaiah in his hands, was reading aloud in the desert, and was approached by Philip, who baptized him right there, by the roadside. This episode is a landmark. It shows that from the beginning, the message of Christ was already reaching the heart of Africa, and more, it shows that it was not the colonizer who brought Jesus to the black man. African Christianity did not begin with slave ships. It began with revelation, with seeking, with a personal encounter with the scriptures, long before European theology attempted to rewrite the faith with a new cover. Egypt, in turn, became one of the major centers of early Christianity. Alexandria was home to one of the most important churches of the first centuries. Thinkers, teachers, and mystics emerged there. The Coptic Gospels, sacred texts preserved by Egyptian Christians, contain details not found in the canonical versions. These texts, excluded in later councils, reveal deeper layers of Christ's message, with a strong mystical, philosophical, and spiritual charge. The Copts developed their own liturgical tradition, with hymns, fasts, and symbolic reading of the scriptures, all directly connected to the ancestry of the African people. Coptic monks inhabited deserts, caves, and mountains where they sought contemplation, silence, and communion with God. They formed spiritual networks that profoundly influenced later Christian spirituality. In Sudan, even in the face of persecution and isolation, Christian communities resisted for centuries. Black peoples, with their own traditions, developed interpretations of the scriptures that integrated elements of local culture with the message of Jesus. And here it is important to say, this was not syncretism, as it is pejoratively accused. It was spiritual wisdom. It was the ability to recognize that faith is not static. It moves, adapts, and becomes embodied in the life of each people. But why aren't these stories told in Bible schools? Why don't we learn in theological courses about the great black teachers of the first centuries? Why have the names of Ethiopian saints, Coptic martyrs, and Sudanese spiritual leaders been erased from the official records of the faith? The answer leads us, once again, to an intentional process of silencing. Because admitting that Christianity flourished in Africa before Europe would shake the structure of theological racism that has formed over the centuries. This would reveal that black people were not only present, but were pillars of the Christian faith. And even more, that ancestral African spirituality was not replaced by the Christian faith. It was incorporated, preserved, and in many cases kept the flame of faith burning when empires were only interested in controlling, dominating, and profiting from religion. And we cannot forget a figure often ignored, Simon of Cyrene, an African man who appears in the Gospels during one of the most dramatic moments of the narrative, the crucifixion. Jesus, already weak, falls under the weight of the cross, and the Roman soldiers force a common man to carry it. That man was Simon, and Cyrene was a city located in North Africa, territory corresponding to present-day Libya. In other words, it was a black man, an African, who helped Christ on his final journey to Golgotha. This image is so symbolic, so powerful, but it is rarely celebrated. They prefer European representations with pale faces, light eyes, and blonde hair to obscure the fact that Africa was there, present, alive, active, in the most crucial moments of the Christian faith. What if Simon of Cyrene is more than just a random man pulled from the crowd? What if he represents all the black people who, throughout history, have carried the cross of Christianity on their backs, without recognition, without honor, but with faithfulness? The hidden side of early Christianity in Africa is not lost. It is merely concealed behind edited versions of history. It lies in apocryphal texts, oral traditions, ancient chants, the ruins of the first African churches, and in the eyes of those who never allowed their faith to be extinguished. And today, with the awakening of ancestral consciousness, this truth is beginning to emerge, not as rebellion but as reconciliation. Because true faith does not exclude, it welcomes. It recognizes the voice of God in all languages, among all peoples, in all colors. Now let me ask you, had you ever heard of the Coptic Gospels? Did you know that the first African Christian was baptized before any European? If this surprised you, comment below. Africa has been there from the beginning. If Simon of Cyrene touched you, write, "I carry this cross with pride." And if you feel that this historical and spiritual rescue is necessary, also comment, "This story needs to be told." Your participation here is not just a comment. It's a way to break the silence that has lasted for centuries. If there is something that truly pulsates intensely in African ancestry, it is the power of names. Each name carries with it not only an identity, but an energy, a vibration that connects the one who receives it with the universe, with ancestral spirits, and with the very creative force that governs everything. When we speak of Ogun, Obatala, Yansa, we are not just talking about mythical figures. We are talking about spiritual archetypes, about energy codes that, for millennia, have guided entire peoples, protected communities, conducted rituals, and harmonized people's lives with the forces of nature and the cosmos. These names carry power. They are like keys that open invisible portals, that activate a direct connection with the divine. And if we pay attention, many of these same attributes appear in the Bible, not as a coincidence, but as proof that ancestral African wisdom, in its essence, dialogues with the biblical message since ancient times. Ogun, for example, is known as the warrior, the forger of paths, the one who cuts, opens, and prepares the road. He is the patron of tools, technology, and courage. And if we look at biblical characters, we perceive echoes of this same force. Moses, in parting the Red Sea, in leading his people through the desert, in confronting kings and armies with supernatural determination, manifests a similar energy. Joshua, in bringing down the walls of Jericho, does not act merely with military strategy. He channels a force that opens impossible paths, that breaks down seemingly inviolable barriers. The energy of Ogun is present, even if it is not called that. The essence is there, the courage to face obstacles, the ability to transform chaos into order, the power to open paths for others to follow. Obatala, in turn, is the archetype of creation and purity. He delicately molds humanity, infuses order and balance, and maintains harmony in the world. And if you observe carefully, you will find resonances of this principle in biblical texts that speak of the creation of man and woman in the image and likeness of God. It is not just a poetic detail. It is the vibration of an ancestral name that manifests the power to create, organize, and balance. What the African peoples called Obatala, the Hebrews described as the breath of God that gives life to clay. Different names, same essence, same energy. And this is repeated countless times. African names are not just words, they are channels of energy. They are spiritual codes that carry within them universal principles, principles that the Bible also recorded, but which have often been decontextualized, translated, silenced, or forgotten throughout history. Yemanja is another powerful example. She governs the winds, storms, rapid changes and transformations. In biblical texts, we see prophets who invoke or deal with storms, winds and natural signs in a supernatural way. Elijah again, with his dominion over fire and the forces of heaven. Elisha, who parts the water. Moses, who transforms rivers and seas. All these characters manifest vibrations that are, in a way, reflections of the same principle that Africans call Yemanja. It is fascinating to realize that what was discredited, demonized, or hidden in Africa appears in the Bible as a legitimate and revered divine manifestation. What changes? Only the name, the language, and the cultural interpretation. And when we look at biblical names, we find meanings that often resonate directly with African energies. Daniel, meaning God is my judge, echoes the justice and guidance of Shango. Elijah, meaning the Lord is my God, reflects the spiritual dominion that we also find in African deities that connect the human to the divine. Each word, each syllable, each name carries memory, vibration, and purpose. And for centuries, these names have been erased or translated in such a way that the connection to African ancestry was lost, leaving the people disconnected from their original spiritual roots. The ancestral wisdom that names carry is not limited to spiritual symbolism. It also acts in people's daily lives. Names like Ogun, Obatala, and Yemanja not only define spiritual entities, they are invoked for protection, strength, health, and prosperity. They carry within them instructions for living in harmony with nature, for facing challenges, and for leading a balanced life. And if this energy is present in biblical names, in prophets, in African spiritual leaders, and in creation itself, then we are not dealing with mere coincidences. We are dealing with a wisdom that transcends borders, time, and space, that connects peoples and histories, and that shows that African ancestry has never been absent from sacred history, even if attempts were made to hide it. Notice that even after centuries of cultural erasure and historical manipulation, this force remains. It is at the heart of the communities that preserved ancestral worship, in the sacred spaces that survived, in the chants that still echo in villages and cities, in the sacred books that have survived the test of time. And it continues to live in each person who decides to reconnect with their roots, with their name, with their energy. Because the spiritual power of a name is not limited to a word. It is energy, vibration, consciousness, presence. When you know the power of your name, you begin to access a forgotten wisdom, a direct connection with the divine, a reminder of that which could never be erased. So tell me in the comments, which African name resonated with you the most? If you feel a connection between biblical and African names, write, I feel the living ancestry. And if you are beginning to understand that names are not just words, but spiritual forces, also comment, this wisdom needs to be remembered. Leave your contribution, like, comment and share, because every comment helps spread this message and reconnect more and more people with their spiritual roots. When we stop to look at our own faith, it's impossible not to ask ourselves, do you know your faith, or only what you've been led to believe? For decades, even centuries, we have been taught to accept interpretations that don't represent us, that often distort our history and disconnect us from the roots that should strengthen our spirituality. The Bible, the Gospels, the sacred texts, all of them carry profound wisdom, but they also carry layers of manipulation and concealment. And hidden within these layers are echoes of African ancestry, of the orishas, of the gods of nature, of the vital force that our ancestors venerated and honored every day. It is a legacy that has been silenced, distorted and forgotten, but that remains alive, pulsating in every gesture, in every word, in every symbol that we manage to recover. Think for a moment about all the times you grew up hearing that some spiritual practices were wrong, demonic, sinful, while others were holy and acceptable. Think about how many books were removed, how many names were erased, how many rituals were transformed into sin. And yet, within these same texts that were delivered to us in fragmented form, there are signs, codes, patterns that point to a greater truth. A truth that connects the biblical prophets with the orishas, that links the power of Melchizedek with the strength of Obatala, that unites the courage of Elijah with Shango and the wisdom of Moses with Yemanja. When we understand this, we begin to realize that our spiritual identity was shaped not only by what we were taught, but also by what was hidden from us. And what to do with this awareness, how to recover the connection with our ancestry without abandoning the faith we have learned to respect, love, and follow. The answer is simpler than it seems, but it requires courage. It is necessary to reclaim, question, and reflect. It is necessary to look at the Bible with awakened eyes and realize that God is not limited to a name, a face, or a culture. He manifests himself where there is awareness, where there is pure intention, where there is respect for life and for the spiritual principles that govern the universe. And if we accept this, we can begin to integrate ancestral African wisdom into our daily faith, recognizing that the names, rituals, stories, and orishas are not rivals of the Christian faith, but extensions, echoes, manifestations of the same divine principle that adapts to different peoples, times, and places. Reflecting on this, we realize that our spiritual identity is not something fixed, but something that can be reclaimed. It is not completely lost, but needs to be awakened. And the first step is to accept that what has been hidden from us is no less important than what we have been taught. That our African ancestry is as sacred as any European religious tradition that has been presented to us. That the names of Ogun, Obatala, Iansa, Shango, Yemanja, and so many others carry meanings as powerful as the biblical names of Moses, Elijah, Joshua, Solomon, or Abraham. That true faith is not blind, but conscious, capable of dialoguing with different manifestations of the divine, and that, in doing so, we become whole, connected, and spiritually strong. When we look at our own history, we realize how many voices have been silenced. The voices of wise women, priests, African spiritual leaders, entire communities that kept the flame of the sacred alive amidst persecution, prejudice, and censorship. All these voices are part of us. They are part of our collective memory, and rescuing them is an act of spiritual courage. It is recognizing that African Christianity, the orishas, the prophets, the ancestors, all of them, form a living tapestry that connects us with the divine in profound and unexpected ways. And as we reflect on this identity, we begin to realize that faith is not a shirt that is put on us ready to wear, but a fabric that we can weave with threads of our own ancestry, with the energy of our names, with the strength of the African gods that still live within us. We realize that our spirituality is not a mistake, not something to be feared, but a key to accessing deeper levels of consciousness, understanding, and purpose. And it is precisely at this point that each of us needs to ask ourselves, am I willing to know my spiritual truth? Am I ready to accept that my faith can be much greater, richer, and more connected than what I have been taught to believe? Now, if you are feeling this connection, if you have realized that your faith can dialogue with your ancestry, that you can recognize the orishas, the names, the rituals, and integrate this without losing your belief, comment below. My ancestry is sacred. If any revelation touched your heart, also write, my faith and my story are connected. And if you feel that other people need to awaken to this truth, share this video and comment. This message needs to reach everyone. Each comment strengthens collective awareness and helps bring to light what has been silenced for centuries, because spiritual awakening is more than personal. It's a movement that needs to be shared. If you've made it this far, congratulations. This shows that you truly care about your faith, your ancestry, and the truth that has been hidden for centuries. Now, I want to ask you something very important. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos, because we still have many more secrets and revelations about African gods, the Bible, and ancestral spirituality that need to be shared. And if you've made it to the end, leave a comment below with the phrase, "I am awakening to my spiritual truth." I want to see who really stayed until the end, and who is ready to reflect on their faith and ancestry in a conscious way. Every comment like this strengthens our community and helps spread this message to more people. Also, don't forget to leave your like. This is a sign that you value this information and want to see even more in-depth content about spirituality, prophets, orishas, and biblical mysteries. And finally, click on the next video that's appearing on the screen now. It will take you even deeper into this universe of revelations, showing you connections you never imagined and providing practical tools to apply this knowledge to your spiritual life. Did you make it this far? Then comment, like, subscribe, and follow me on this journey of spiritual awakening. The truth doesn't wait, and you can't wait to find out either.